Okay, welcome to everyone, our speakers, our performers, our audience members who are here in the circle with us. Thank you so much. Welcome to Reimagining Canada, Reimagining the People's Constitution, which is a part of the Royal Society of Canada's College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists WAVE event. And it's called the WAVE because we are starting something that's happening across Canada. This is the first event, and it's going to end in Vancouver in a number of hours from now. So at 4 p.m. in every time zone in the country, we're going to have people sharing on this topic. But you folks are the starters for this. And so it's a privilege, being the starters for this event, to have the opportunity to begin by acknowledging that we are here on the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And we would like to very much thank the Mi'kmaq people, and in particular our Mi'kmaq speakers and performers who are with us here today, for sharing this land with us. I'd like to say just a couple of words about the nature of this event. It was inspired by the kind of debates and controversy that have been going on, not just this year, but for many years, about what it means to celebrate Canadian Confederation and what we mean when we talk about Canada 150. The College of New Scholars, Artists, and Scientists of the Royal Society of Canada is a group of young members of academia and also young artists who have been brought together. We're in the Royal Society only for 7 years, and our goal while we're there is to bring together an interdisciplinary body of people that's going to have the opportunity to start conversations. So what the college wanted to do with this event was to start a conversation about what it means to talk about 150 years of Canadian Confederation, but much more importantly, to talk about the next 150 years and how the next 150 years of this place that we currently call Canada, this landmass that has existed long, long before it was called Canada, how the next 150 years can be better, fairer, more beautiful than the last 150 years have been. And so we were asked, those of us who are members of the college in Halifax, and Jennifer Bain and I have worked together on this event, to bring together a group of people who could talk about this. And in some parts of the country, the discussions are among lawyers. In some parts of the country, the discussions are among people who are working in the environment. We wanted to bring together, because both of us work in the arts, we wanted to bring together academics who are interested in the question of what we mean when we think about Canada, with people who are working in the arts in the community to consider the question of what we mean when we think about Canada now, and more importantly, what the role of imagination could be. And it could be scholarly imagination, but it could be an artistic imagination, to help us to rethink the future, reimagine the future, and dream of places where Canada could go. So this is why we brought together this group today. We're extremely privileged and fortunate to have 10 speakers with us who've agreed to join us, speakers and performers who are going to be sharing with us today. And we're hoping that their imaginations, their shared imaginations, will start a dialogue that maybe will continue past this event. Because our main goal for this event is that it starts conversations that will go on into the future. So what we're going to do is ask each of the speakers, one after the other, in a little bit of a slightly slam style, to share a presentation of, in the range of 5 to 7 or 8 minutes, completely of their choice, on the themes of either reimagining Canada or reimagining the People's Constitution. That second theme was inspired by the Parliamentary Poet Laureate of Canada, George Eliot Clarke, someone who's known to quite a few people in this room, who is rewriting the Constitution in verse for this year. So that was the theme that was chosen by the College of New Scholars, Artists and Scientists for their event, this WAVE event, and we've broadened it out to include Reimagining Canada so that we can hold those things together. So we're going to ask each person to share their thoughts of any variety that they want on this topic. You've got your programs where we have detailed bios for each of the presenters. I'm just going to say about a sentence about each of the presenters before they present, and we're going to go straight on through the presentations. And then we're hoping that we'll have time at the end to have a bit of exchange around the circle and share thoughts around. We also want to just quickly note that we have a little reception next door in room 409 after the event with cheese, because cheese makes everything better. Cheese, fruit, veggies, and drinks. If you'd like to come over after that and continue the conversation in an informal way, we'd love to see you. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Richard Simon Taylor if he would be so gracious as to start us off. And it's a great privilege for me to welcome Richard, who is an Oji Mi'kmaq Sundancer of the White Eagle Sundance from the Sipekne'katik First Nation, who has worked extensively in politics, in grassroots organizations, acting, writing, performance. I got to know him as an actor, and we're really, really happy to have him here to start the event today. Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you.
going to share with you folks a little bit of my own writing. I'm going to stand in a circle here. I don't want to take up much more time, but the hummingbird and the frog. She would dance. She was of the old ways, her steps plain and simple. She, with touch as gentle as dewdrop kisses upon high cheekbones on an orange and yellow day. She was a hummingbird, of tiny wings that flickered and of bones unassuming. Her heart fluttered fast. Peeked upon, but never for too long, she tucked away behind an old owl and rested with a fierce porcupine. She remained enveloped about her routines. She would pick the berries and eat the berries. She found clams with her feet and pulled fiddleheads from the earth. She harvested safety. The young ones would bury their faces when strangers were about, their tears leaving mi'kmaq impressions upon her skirt. Mending wings and broken hearts, she would place them in the bounty of her love, hidden away so that none could steal them. And so was her dance, plain and simple. When I wrote that, that's part of maybe a 5 or 6 part stanza. And the thing is that our people and our stories for many, many years have not been told by us. And so when I consider the question posed before us, I largely feel as though I'm not a part of those celebrations. I feel largely that those celebrations cannot possibly include me because my voice has been taken away. Because the young people that are with me today, their voices were taken away. Because our elders and our fathers and our mothers, their voices were taken away. And so the political and social climate where it is today in 2017 is such that these issues have been brought once again to the forefront, like what we saw in the 60s. And it is absolutely imperative that we don't allow this to go by without having had done enough. I can say to anybody here, I can make a statement, take down the Cornwallis statue. I say, people say that you're angry. You're just angry. You're hateful. But when it comes from other people, and there's a chorus of individuals of multi-faiths, multi-nationalities, multi-genders, multi-sexualities, saying the same thing, mainstream society has no choice but to either adhere or openly admit refusal. But there's no more hiding. And that's all I got to say.
I don't think that there can have been a better thing said to start these conversations. And I want to thank Richard for his gift of music as well as his thoughts. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Shirley Tillotson, who many of us around this circle know, who taught history at a number of universities, including foremost Dalhousie and the University of King's College for 30 years, and who has spent a lot of her career reflecting on the question of what it means to be, and what it has meant in the past, to be a citizen of Canada, of this place we call Canada. So I'll ask you, Shirley, to share your thoughts.
Great. Thank you. This is really interesting for me because I'm looking forward to, I just retired, I'm looking forward to making connections between the academic history I've done and the kind of community history of the sort that Richard has just shared, and I know some of the rest of you will too. What I've spent my career doing is to try to get people to see themselves as beings who live in time. We look towards the future. The project today is to say, what's the next 150 going to be like? Is it going to be better? But we also live with a past, and we're at that point, sometimes a rather sharp point, where the two connect. I've been interested, as many of you have been, in social justice, and my kind of key point today is that the constitutional time and social justice time are slower and longer than biographical time. We live inside very long projects. And I'm going to illustrate with a couple of stories so as to put that on the ground for you. I'm telling stories as historians do in a very kind of compressed way. But at the end of one course that I taught, first time I taught, it was called Justice, Freedom, and the State in 20th Century Canada. Go big or go home, right? Justice, freedom, everything. Mm-hmm. And at the end of that class, which was a class in political history, and I found myself, after having talked with the students over the course of the year, I found myself saying to them as a kind of, where do we go from here moment, I said, art, music, film, theater, stories may actually be some of the most important tools you'll bring to your political life. And I'm happy to say one of them has gone on to, in fact, do graphic comics in a political mode, and I'm really pleased to see that because, when you listen to singing, like Richard's just given us, or a story he's told, you get a resource of hope that takes you, that you can carry with you through that long, sometimes painfully long constitutional time, and that sort of those long arcs, 30 years, 40 years longer of social justice struggles. So one of those was the history of human rights in Canada. It's a concept that really wasn't around in the 1930s, and it becomes part of our vocabulary in the 1940s and 50s. And in that period, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, Canada would sometimes sign on to international conventions about human rights. But it actually couldn't then deliver on what it committed to do because the federal government can't make the provinces do things that the provinces constitutionally are empowered to do. And so Canada's being a good citizen, and then they come home and Manitoba doesn't want to do it. Too bad. So we entered into this long struggle where a lot of provinces generated human rights law, and as each of those developed a body of law and a body of practice, social movements also began to form around that kind of law, pushing for more, trying to make it better, trying to make it do more. Ultimately, those people became the kind of movement that helped to sustain a campaign in support of the taking of 28, the women's equality section in the Charter of Rights in the federal Constitution. So in the end, that long process of community building, of singing songs, of looking internationally to solidarity produced a real effect. But we're talking about a gap between 1930 and 1982. So don't lose hope. If you see yourself as a person in time, you'll, I think, understand the, in some ways, the ephemerality of our own individual projects, but their power and their solidity when they're combined with others in the long term. The other one I wanted to mention, the other sort of Constitution, the British North America Act, really was a source of enormous anger and frustration in the 1930s, during the unemployment crisis of the 1930s. when the federal government finally got around in 1935 to introducing a bunch of statutes, like an 8 hours law that would share around the work among the people, finally they're doing something to deal with this crisis. Well, it had to go to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council, who said, sorry, federal government can't do that. Only provinces can regulate hours of work. Right? So, again, the long process of negotiating among the provinces and each province going at it in a slightly different way took place. In 1965, a Canadian Labour Standards Act just governs federal employees and federally regulated employees is introduced. Again, we're talking here 30 years. It's something that made a real difference. You got paid for vacation, you got paid for overtime. There was a real value in that. The BNA Act, I'm afraid, was experienced more as a barrier to human flourishing than an asset. And I'm sure many of you, in terms of Jordan's principle and the delivery of healthcare benefits to Indigenous kids, the squabbling between the levels of government actually killed someone. So, it's hard to be fond of the division of powers, but it has a history that is in some ways about preserving cultural differences, preserving linguistic differences. And so I wouldn't want anyone to say that my pointing out to the stalemates and the problems generated by the division of powers was meant to say it's all evil, we should be a central state, or what. That's a longer subject for another day. But in all of those struggles to make change against the force of this law, this body of law, you had social movements who generated support for each other and themselves in part through song, through drama, through music. And I'm not going to try to set the BNA Act to song. It's not. That's not going to be the way I make you love it. It is an important part of our history. It's worth knowing. And in that vein, I shared with you a source of documents about from the 1860s up to 1949. That's when Confederation with Newfoundland brought us all together. I think this website is very fun because one of the things that connects people in the humanities and academic life to people in the community doing cultural work and community history, it's our love of language. It's the cool things that people do with words, the powerful things that people do with words. And this is a real great way of getting you into some words that ended up having a lot of power for good and for ill in our lives, so I hope you explore it a little bit. And that's what I've got.
Thank you very much, Kay. Thank you. That was a resource that I personally didn't know about, so I hugely appreciate your sharing it with us. Probably the thing that I was most excited about today is the fact that we have 3 young artists with us, just bouncing off what Shirley has just said about the importance of art and poetry and song, visual art in pushing the struggle forward and pushing change forward. And we have 3 young artists who are the future of art and the arts in here on this land of Mi'kmaq. So we're very, very grateful to them for being with us today. And the first of those artists who's agreed to speak with us is Chesnay Julian, who is a poet and storyteller who has used and is using her expression to stand up in the face of inequality and racism and to share with the world her lived experience as a proud Mi'kmaq woman. And so we'd like to invite her to share with us now.
Do I stand up?
If you would like to, it's completely up to you.
Okay. Do I say something about my poem first or after?
Whenever you'd like to, Chesnay, it's completely up to you.
Okay. I wrote this poem and it's called I Am, and it's very okay. I am an Aboriginal woman. You'd have to start from the beginning, but you wouldn't understand that we have been through enough. But I promise you, I will be tough. Not just for my community, but for my family. I will be strong. For you to have humility, you'd have to walk in these shoes, you have to see through these eyes, and you have to hear through these ears. I am an Aboriginal woman. I am said to be weak because of the sorrowful words that I speak, with the tears falling down my cheeks. Because I am scared. I am scared that with the words I have spoken, I am finally broken. Broken with the thought that my culture has been taken. But how can it be taken so quick? The thought of this makes me sick. But I am an Aboriginal woman. I wrote that because we were doing a project in this class, and we had to do something about Aboriginals and stuff, and I just wrote things down that I thought was good, and yeah, I don't know what to say.
Oh. You said it beautifully.
Thank you.
I think probably everyone in the circle just wants to take a minute to absorb the words that you've just shared with us. Thank you, Shazka. That's going to be a hard act to follow, and hard, major words to absorb. And we have another powerful woman to come next, Tamar Adina, who is the founder of Music Liberatory, which is using music to empower women to make their voices and their creativity heard, which is very much one of the parts of the conversation that we've been hoping to have today. So,
thank you. We're just going to amplify your message. That's Kayla over there. And she's going to join me.
Please, yeah, come on down. Please come down.
Where's the extra chair?
There's one right there.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Kayla Borden's been involved with Music Liberatory from day one, so she knows a lot of the story. I am inspired by many things, including the words of Dead Prez, which is a hip-hop group, when they say, "I blame the system, but the problem is ours." And as a woman who did 10 years on the front lines of anti-violence work, so I volunteered in a feminist run collective in BC, answering the phone that ran 24 hours a day, and we also had a transition house that sheltered women and their children escaping male violence, which included an array of male violence, not only being afraid and in danger from your husband or boyfriend, but also your father, your pimp, your boss, your roommate. And in some cases, we housed women who couldn't get abortion in their wherever that they lived. Speaking of constitutional rights, I would recommend to you, if you want to think about violence against women in the context of the Constitution, to read Lee Lakeman's book. I want to say it's called Broken Promises. It definitely has the word promises in there, but it's in the relationship of violence against women and the Constitution, which is pretty much ignored, especially if you're thinking about the rates of violence against women, and in particular with Aboriginal women, but across the board. The reason I talk so much and think about violence against women is that it's fundamentally where I start in my worldview and in everything that I do. And having done frontline work for 10 years, I am maybe wrong, but I am convinced that music is the most useful tool and effective tool and underused tool for women, and especially for women who see themselves as activists. Music Liberatory is very small. I would say we're dinky, and we're just trying our best to teach ourselves music. We have a weekly group of just a few of us, and we get together, and no one has any particular great knowledge of music, but we're sure that we can figure it out, and that's kind of our attitude. And we recently finished a project called Women Safe and Sound that created a film and a song called Sisterhood, which we will perform for you in a minute. I think in the context of democratic process and constitution and the dead pres quote is that, and about art is like, if we need to be imagining how things are going to work out in all, how messy it's going to be on the way to working out. I mean, I often think that it would only be like at least 3 or 4 generations. Even if we just cut the bull right now, fix all the problems tomorrow, I'm not sure it would be until another 4 or 5 generations where they could enjoy the benefits of that true reconciliation. This project that we did was 10 weeks of collaborative lyric writing with mostly women who did not consider themselves artists. And then the song, no, you weren't there in that part. And then we opened kind of like a one evening workshop where we invited more women to come help us interpret the lyrics. And then those interpretations were a little bit more developed, and then they became the visuals for the film. Many of the women who were in the lyric writing are also in the film. And then we performed it at Prismatic and Jazz Fest. Again, in the context of Constitution, taking responsibility for ourselves and our power in relation to each other, and violence against women, the song purposefully directs the call to action off of the battered woman, because it's about violence against women, and onto the woman who is in better shape. So I find it irritating, to say the least, that battered women are constantly instructed with what they should do in the face of violence. And that besides, dealing with the man directly, the question really as women, if I'm looking at it from a feminist activist, what am I doing for myself and for other women, then my call is to a woman who's in good shape. So the lyrics of the chorus, which you need to pay attention to because you're going to sing with us, is woman, sister, sister, woman. When you a woman, when you a sister, every woman needs a sister. Every sister needs a hood. And I think you'll notice in there that we're saying, one day you could be in good shape, and one day a man could rape you. And when you're in good shape, like, what are you doing? That's our kind of the question. And we have a story in the lyrics. How do you want to do it, Kay? Do you want to walk around? We're working on our performance technique, so this is a good practice for us. Acapella. Oh, do you want to hear the tune? Or how about I'll sing? We'll do like this. Kay's going to start us. I call her Kay. Her name's Kayla. She's going to start us. I'll sing the chorus. You'll catch it. Then by the second chorus, you'll start to, and then when we do the real chorus, you'll do like Richard volume. You want to stand? Yeah, we're practicing, okay? Our style. So should we walk around? Should we stand over there? Yeah, we're gonna really break out. Oh, we don't know how to for the camera.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back to the camera.
That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Sister opens back door. Woman walks in. Sister removes woman's mask, reveals a yellow-green stain. Sister puts on hot water and lets the tea steep. Woman opens her mouth and the dam breaks. They follow water down to the ocean where her stories meet.
Okay,
All right.
sorry, we're working it out.
All right.
Do you want to hear it from the top? I think we're supposed to hear it. Second? All right.
Yeah.
From the top.
Oh, you want me to start over again?
Yeah.
All right. Sister opens back door. Woman walks in. Sister removes woman's mask, reveals a yellow-green stain. Sister puts on hot water and lets the tea steep. Woman opens her mouth and the dam breaks. They follow water down to the ocean where stories meet.
That's going to.
Okay. Woman pulls the loose strings of her tattered fabric. Sister extends her hand, woman flinches systematic. And silent sip, sip and sip, as the faucet fills the tub, drip, drip and drip. Sister lays her dresses on the piece of bed. Woman takes time selecting purple, pink, or red.
Woman, sister, sister, woman. When you a woman, when you a sister, when you a sister, woman. Every woman needs a sister. Every sister needs a hood. Every woman needs a sister. Every sister needs a hood.
Woman soaks her skin, splashes at the bubbles, blue turns to rust, taking on her troubles. Sister steps her bare breast, turns to pull the drain. Dirty water gurgles, only scummy ring remains. Sister knocks and brings a towel. Together they scrub off the foul. Conscious mirror, wait to see who the woman chooses to be. Sister sees her standing tall, as there is no storm at all. Sister dresses to the chair. Strong fingers untangles her hair. Split in 3 and 6 and 9, I break for each waste of time. Sister shoulder, woman's hand, missing tarnished wedding band.
Woman, sister, sister, woman. Oh, when you a woman, when you a sister, when you a sister, woman. Every woman needs a sister. Every sister needs a hood. Every woman needs a sister. Every sister needs a hood.
Hands extended, interlink. A silenced witness doesn't blink. A penny sounds an echoed story. Woman reaches into dress. Not enough to build a future, just enough to take a step. Sister brushes up the palette, paints 3 lines across her cheek, worries the door, set the face, rising fist, we rise to lead.
Woman, sister, sister, woman. When you a woman, when you a sister, when you a sister, woman. Every woman needs a sister. Every sister needs a hood. Every woman needs a sister. Every sister needs a hood. Thank you. A final note on that is we're now in a campaign where we're asking other female artists to redo the song in their own way. We would really like a lot of different genre interpretations. And it could be like, never did a song before to, I don't know, Beyonce.
Very awesome. Well, we have a number of artists around this circle who perhaps would be interested in that task. So I hope that will be part of what comes out of today. Thank you so much, Tamar. And thank you so much, Kayla. Thank you for coming. We really, really appreciate it. Our next speaker is Rohini Banerjee, who is an associate professor of French and Francophone Studies in the Department of Modern Languages and Classics at St. Mary's University. And her primary area of research is in the Francophone literatures and cultures of the Indian Ocean. And we're very grateful to her for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rohini.
I'm just going to take a second to kind of absorb what I'm feeling, and I've written things on a cue card, just sort of words and images, but I'm going to probably speak from the heart, which is I think where we're all bringing our energy today. One of the things that I find so fascinating about the word imagination is that there's so much liberty in that, and in my field, literature allows you that. I feel like fiction can let you just go and explore. And then I go in front of a classroom and I somehow have to teach this to students, and I find that so restrictive. And so I've been secretly sort of writing stories and poems, and secretly because I feel like I'm entering a part of myself that hasn't been explored, a part of me that hasn't been validated or explained or justified. And so I'm going to be using the term I acknowledge or I occupy because that's really how I feel. I feel like that I'm not owning anything, that I'm just really sharing space with people, with energy, with writers, with students, colleagues. But sometimes I feel like I'm not really in front of a classroom. Sometimes I feel like I'm in my heart, and I think this is a wonderful space for me to share some of my thoughts. So I'm grateful for the opportunity. I honor my grandparents who let their children get on a plane from northern India and let them go to a place called Prince Edward Island, thinking that this was going to be a place of opportunity. This was 1968. My mother was 21 years old, unmarried. This was a big risk for her. And she landed in Alberton, PEI, with her long black hair and her green sari. And she met fishermen, and she went to hay downs and haystacks and barnyard dances, and met Mounties, and met people who were fascinated and afraid of what they were witnessing as more and more immigrants were coming to the Maritimes. She worked in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia as a nurse, and spent a lot of time trying her best to build a home as she married my dad and brought into existence 2 children, one of whom was myself. I think what's really interesting is that she made connections with people around her and really didn't know that her daughter would eventually become someone who also connected with other people. So I think we always have these thoughts about what we imagine our Canada will be like. She imagined Prince Edward Island to be royal. She imagined what lobsters might taste like. She imagined what the handsome, dashing red Mountie might want from her. And then she imagined what it might be like to open a boutique in Penhorn Mall named Maharani Boutique and sell Indian jewelry to people that were very foreign to her. She imagined what a fish and chip truck might feel like stationed out on Spring Garden Road. But she didn't imagine being asked what her band card would be when she's in Shubenacadie. She didn't imagine what it would be like to be asked if she's from Preston or Cherrybrook. She didn't imagine that her daughter would be constantly asked why French and not chemistry in medical school. She didn't imagine that her 3 grandsons, those are my kids, would be constantly wondering how Canadian they themselves are. I know that when I went off to France to study for a year, I grew a lot of gray hair on my dad's head that year, thinking I'd be off to Paris as a go-go dancer. Very concerned that his lovely little Indian daughter from Dartmouth was going to go off into France and never come back. And one thing that he didn't know was that I was very, very proud to have my Canadian passport. I was happy to distinguish myself from the Americans. I was also very happy to distinguish myself from the British Indians that I encountered a lot. I was 19, and I had really no sense of who really I was. I was just part of another group of university students. But it was at Charles de Gaulle Airport when I was asked several times my place of birth. And I would continue to say I was born in Halifax. And I was asked why my French didn't sound like it was from Canada, why it didn't sound like Celine Dion. And again, I wasn't aware of how I was being categorized, screened, detected, and how my presence was being validated without me in power of that validation. I didn't understand why on the lease of my apartment in France said, no Maghrébien could be allowed into your apartment building. Didn't understand what the Front National meant. I had no idea about what kind of political fire I was coming into in the 90s in France. But it was when I returned and when I was asked if I enjoyed my time in France, I had to remind myself that my experience was very different than my white friends. This was something that it took me 20 years to understand until I then myself was encouraging students of color to go as part of St. Mary's, to go to France and study. And I reminded them that this would be a great place and time for your own construction of identity and what you can imagine your Canada to be. When my children go and travel with me, and recently we were in East Africa, and you know, my children were asked several times if they were Canadian, and they would say yes. And they were asked if their parents were Canadian, and they would say yes. And then they would be asked, but where are you really from? And I'm so proud to know that my children have found their own way of imagining what their Canada is. I'm excited to see that they're growing into themselves much earlier than I had. And I know that for us, when we talk about India and our heritage, we also include Uganda, which is where my father-in-law is from. We include Spain, where my mother-in-law is from. We include some of the nomadic peoples of Afghanistan, where my maternal grandfather would have been coming from. We talk about India as so diverse, and so there's so many parts of me that I think are being imagined and reimagined every second. And I'm grateful for this opportunity today. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, one of the things that we were hoping would happen when we sort of created this event was that we would hear ripples happening across different speakers, and starting from Shaznay's reflections on being an Aboriginal woman through the womanhood and sisterhood that you folks brought out through your experience as a woman and an Indian woman in Canada. I think we have a really great line to the work of Maria Jose Yax-Fraser, who is our next speaker, who is an artivist, scholarly and community-based research practitioner and leader who has worked in migration and settlement services, looking at the question of folks, and especially women, coming to this land for over 20 years. And we're very grateful to her for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here too. I think that I would like to see Canada, as Canada continues to evolve, each passing day I would like to see the Constitution being framed to reflect the multiple colors, sizes, shapes, the diversity that makes up our communities. You know, our community in Halifax, our communities in Nova Scotia, and our communities in Canada. I would like to see it being representative of diversity. And I think that's why, or the reasons I wanted to dress like this, because I wanted to show the colors, the vibrancy that the diversity can bring to our communities. And I would like to see the Constitution being framed in ways that it reflects a Canada that is founded in continuous process of reflection and debates, discussions like we are having today. I would like it to see that continuity as new waves of immigration, of immigrants coming to our shores, particularly now that we are facing struggles with population decline, you know, that is having an impact in our economy and our population growth. I would like to see that diversity, the appreciation for diversity, but also as we continue to deal with our past, right? As we continue to acknowledge that we are in Mi'kmaq territory. I consider myself an artivist. This term, I just learned it very recently through a woman that came from Guatemala. She is a hip hop artist, and she sings a lot on political issues, violence against women, because Guatemala has been a country that has targeted women and the bodies of women through the civil war, through the genocide, and today through criminal activity. So I like to take that concept and see my work as an archivist. I like to think that through my community and academic work, I am nurturing new possibilities and pushing a community to rethink the kinds of systemic injustices and inequality that are knit into our current constitution and Canadians' current institutions, including the academy, the immigration system, and the education system, and many other systems. And I think that one of the ways, or I like to think that one of the ways in which I do this is through my work with the Immigrant Settlement, the Immigrant Migrant Women's Association of Halifax. It's an organization that was founded by 10 immigrant women, and I am one of them. We have 4 objectives. The first objective is to bring the voice of immigrant and migrant women into the larger movements, aiming to improve the well-being of all women in Halifax and hopefully in Nova Scotia as well. The other objective is to bring awareness into the larger community of the concerns of immigrant women and girls, and to do advocacy work. The third objective is to do research and assess the situations that are affecting immigrant and migrant women and girls. And the fourth objective is to showcase projects, initiatives, and the contributions that immigrant and migrant women make to their communities, because oftentimes this is made very invisible. You know, their voices are oftentimes made invisible in the community, and also through the migration process, particularly when immigrant women come as dependents of their husbands. And I have used art as a medium to bring the voices of immigrant and migrant women into the larger movement in order to raise awareness of the contributions they make. The project that I'm going to talk about today is called A Mosaic: Identity and Community Connection. And the purpose of this project was to bring women together to discuss issues of identity, community, sense of place, and belonging through conversation and through art. And so we had 10 weeks of creating art and having conversations. And because I come from an Indigenous background, for me, this circle is very important, right? Having discussions in a circle to discuss the themes of community, identity, took place at the very beginning of each session. And then based on the discussions that we had, the explorations that we had, we created art. And we used 4 mediums. We used clay, we used copper, we used glass, and we used material. And we added as we went. You know, we had the freedom to add diverse art materials. And so these pieces of art were also accompanied by some writing, some poem. Women were encouraged to either write poems or anything that reflected their own imaginations when they were creating this art. And so the pieces of art have become an art exhibit, and the whole idea behind the art exhibit is to have a communication with the public, with the community, about and raise awareness about the concerns, the issues that immigrant and migrant women face, but also the contributions that they make to the communities. In this project, we have women that are artists, women that are scientists, women that are IT people, and we had a great variety of skills and abilities, and we also had women that were already citizens but had been here for a long time and identified themselves as immigrants. We had women that were just in the process of applying for the citizenship. We had landed immigrants, but we also had participants that were refugee claimants. And we had ages from 15 to 60 years old, and it was an amazing project. And so what I want to do today is to share with you some of the writings that came out of that project. And the first one is called Metamorphosis. And Metamorphosis in this art project that Pia created is a butterfly. So it's a caterpillar, and the caterpillar at the end becomes a butterfly. But it is that process, right, of coming also into a new country and having to reshape your identity and your sense of belonging. But it's also, I think it's very much reflecting of what Canada is going through, right? That process of changing and that process of becoming that beautiful butterfly that will be very colorful and very reflective of diversity. So,
from crawling on soil to taking the skies, the caterpillar changes in shape, but not in essence. Although difficult to recognize, the being is there. We constantly change. The environment shapes us, like the wind erodes the rocks or the water shapes the land. What I was last minute is no longer there. What is left is the result of the transformation. Feeling lucky and thankful for the environment and the elements my life was exposed to.
The second poem is from a second-generation Canadian who, in one of the art sessions that we had to share with each other our inspirations for creating this art, she talked about being a second generation and always being confronted with the question, where are you coming from? You know, that Rohini was also mentioning. And she had moved from Vancouver to the East Coast. But also, you know, her reflections pushed me to write an article on the coast after I had an experience with my own children and the conversations on the question, on being asked the question, where are you from? And so I think it's very reflective of you know, immigrants, and no matter how long you've been here, immigrants and their children, they will always have to deal with the questions of where are you from. And I think I would like to see Canada change that. You know, I would like to see Canada and Canadians not having to ask that question. You know, that is not really a question that people have to face every day, even though they have been born here. And so she wrote this Two Prairie Oceans. Johanna.
The Pacific and the Atlantic, with the red earth in between. Your waves have shaped me and taken me on a journey to the heart of the continent where all sinks deep within, from hardships and joys, irritants to a poor little shell, spitting out such beauty and pearls, from rain to snow to skies that are blue and gray. It comes together here in Two Prairie Oceans. It's me.
The third poem, or the third thought, it was written by myself. I also participated in the project. I was the researcher, community researcher in the project, but I also participated and created an art piece that described my own process of identification and my identity. And I looked at my Nahual, which is sort of the spirit that it is assigned to a child that has followed me, and I am a woodpecker. So I wrote a thought based on that, and it describes the fact that although we are rooted, you know, we have been born in one place, and as indigenous people, we always connect our being to the earth and sort of always imagine those roots, right, so deep, but we have been displaced. Often we have been displaced, and so we have taken on roots, right? And my root took me to Canada. And so I talk about those roots and roots.
Claiming roots and honoring my roots. The self is a live mosaic of events, encounters, connections, experiences, smells, flavors, and sounds stitched together from diverse points of departure. We all come from somewhere, from our mother's wombs, from a geographical location, from a familial ancestry. Our surrounding environments and our human interactions shape who we are as humans, the cultures we were born into, the journeys we travel, and the cultures we encounter shape and define who we are now. I am shaped by the significant experiences and processes of decolonization and the reclaiming of my indigenous identity, of becoming a mother, of honoring the roots I travel. Like my art, I am in the process of becoming.
And the last piece is from a woman who, Maria. Maria did a beautiful mandala, and we looked at mandalas of the self, in terms of looking at our identity. And she made a beautiful mosaic and reflected on the diversity of Canadian diversity and what diversity has done for her, and the importance of being inclusive in a society that is multicultural. And so I'm going to ask you to read the poem.
This mosaic represents our community, our Canada. I see Canada as a place where understanding diversity of a wide spectrum of demographics, cultures, religious beliefs, political orientations, socioeconomic status, physical abilities, together with tolerance, acceptance, and respect, creates our unique society. When all individual differences and values are recognized, like in a mosaic, all the different pieces create a beautiful and comprehensive picture.
Thank you. And I just want to end with my interest in making connections with the Indigenous people of Canada and the importance of we as newcomers, as new immigrants, becoming aware of the history. Not the 150 history, but the 500,000 years of history, thousands of years of history, like my history in Guatemala. I'm indigenous Mayan woman, and my ancestors had been there for thousands of years. So I think it's very important, and I find it very, very meaningful, the fact that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in one of the calls to action, has also included a call to action I'm going to read it. That calls on the government of Canada to replace the oath of citizenship with the following. And this is very important for newcomers to Canada, because as you know, when we apply for citizenship and then we have the citizenship ceremony, we have to repeat the oath. We have to commit ourselves that we are going to abide by the Canadian laws. So I am very, very interested in making sure that this call to action actually happens in Canada. And it's the oath to action now, it would be, I swear or affirm that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty. I'm sorry, but this is one of the issues that I struggle a lot as well, to claim allegiance to Her Majesty, because I find that's very much a colonial mentality, and I do hope that sometime Canada moves beyond that and does something about this. Yeah, and then so to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Queen of Canada, her heirs and successors, and that I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada, including treaties with Indigenous peoples, and fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen. Because we all are treaty people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria Jose, and thank you for sharing, and for everybody who read for us. And where you ended, I think, is a wonderful transition to our next speaker, who, like Maria Jose and Brandy, both agreed to join us in the last couple of days, extremely graciously. So we're really grateful. And Brandy is a visual artist whose art has been showcased in a number of venues across the province, including recently the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia. And in the biography that she shared with us, there was this beautiful comment that Brandy is what the Mi'kmaq call a forerunner, a future seeker, showing things that are to come. Thank you.
I am a Mi'kmaq youth, obviously born and raised here in Halifax. I guess mainly what I do is I do a little bit of poetry here and there. I mainly do ink, art, and watercolor. And I just found one of my poems that is actually a part of, in a way, 2 galleries. Obviously the Turtle Grove, and then the one that it was originally inspired from. It wasn't in the gallery, but it was inspired going through the gallery. Definitely not going to be too long, but I've got some of my artwork here that I would like to show everybody, and some sketchbooks, I guess, that could be passed around, because I don't know how else to show you guys. So I guess I'll start from one of my older sketchbooks. And this could just be passed around, and any of you guys see those little green tabs, feel free to flip open to that. So you pass that around. I have more coming. There's not too much in this one. This could just be thrown around. But my original aim there is, I guess I would like to be, my original aim, I guess, would be to also be involved with Aboriginal people as well, and the youth and generations, especially the people that, on the res, there's not a lot of people there that are, from what I've heard and what I've gathered from people that have actually been on the res, that are close friends and also family of mine, is there's not a lot of hope, obviously, because what's happened back then is also still very strongly affecting us now. And if anything, it'd be really cool to just be someone who'd be able to help lead them and be, well, there is a lot of things you can do. You don't have to just spend your day drinking or doing whatever you want, you know what I mean? There's so much more out there. And there's so much more you could be doing with your day, and especially if you're not feeling the best, you could always use that outlet and put it into something, obviously, which some of these have actually been inspired by that, is a lot of these are just maybe I'm feeling kind of crappy, and I just wanted to draw something that made me feel happy. That kind of rhymed. There's only 2 pages in here that I really wanted to show, or 3, I'm not sure, we'll find out. But this is also another example of what I like to do. This sketchbook right here is probably one of the biggest growth spurts for me, mainly because through all those sketchbooks that are going around, it was very clean, detailed, oriented. I didn't like to have little spots of dirt. I didn't like it. But this, I'm a very perfectionist kind of person when it comes to my art. But with this, there's a lot of growth. There's a whole bunch of just random stuff going on over here. Throughout the whole thing, you'll find things upside down, going the other way. There's a whole bunch of sketches over sketches and stuff. But it was definitely a sketchbook of this year that had a lot of amazing and crazy things that I've been able to do this year that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to do unless I was through love. Represent love. But through those, there's a lot of things I got to learn and different inspiration, things I got to do that I probably would never have been able to do. And I feel like as an Aboriginal youth, there are opportunities, but there aren't opportunities. It really depends on who you get in contact with, and there's a lot of youth that don't have that. And it'd be really cool to be someone that'd be able to do that for youth, like for the generation coming as well, to be that person to kind of help maybe lead the way, or even if you can't, at least try to set it up for them. I guess that's all it for me.
Oh yeah, that one.
You can show it.
Actually, never mind. I think there's like 3 galleries I was semi a part of. There's one of the Love Youth Gallery leadership, whatever it was, that I did. I can't remember what it was. And this is one of the pieces that I did. This is one of the pieces that I did that I submitted for the exhibition or whatever it is in the Love office. And I don't know what inspired this. I just really wanted to do something with a dark navy blue, and this is kind of what came out of it. It's still going to be hanging up. I don't know for how long, but
forever.
Just so you know, I am available to do any art pieces.
I have a feeling you might be getting some commissions from this room, Brandy, and thank you. And perhaps there may be some folks in the room who would like to, if Brandy's able to stay around for the reception afterwards, to see a little bit more of her art and to talk to her about that. Thank you, Brandy, and thank you for generously sharing your art with us.
And I guess I'll just throw this out there too as well, is that if anybody would like to see some of the art pieces that I've done in the Turtle Grove project, it's obviously open to the public right now, but our fancy celebration thing is on November 9th at 7 p.m. at the official Art Gallery of Nova Scotia under Turtle Grove, obviously. And there shows my fellow artists and close friends, and also the Walking with Our Sisters poem and another poem that I did about the res as well. It's all there.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
It was awkward, just like me.
It was not at all awkward. It was wonderfully done. Thank you. Speaking of youth artists, it's a wonderful opportunity to introduce Anne Denny, who is a singer, songwriter, musical comedian, and entrepreneur, who along with Ryan Beltmeier began Youth Arts Connection in Halifax. And we're very grateful to her for being with us today to talk about that.
Thank you. Yeah, Brandy, I would really love to work with you. So I'm so grateful that we've met now through this. And yeah, look forward to connecting through Richard. And I want to give props to Leave Out Violence as well, because it's an organization that Youth Art Connection looks up to. We've done so much for youth. So I'm going to say a poem essay that poured out of my heart after Tamar connected me with Roberta a few days ago. My name is Anne Helga Denny, and I'm honored to speak with you. Growing up in London, Ontario, biking the River Thames, little did I know that I was in Little London. A shocking discovery around the age of 8. The parties my parents took little me to centered the city I was in and involved debate. What is Canada? The men gathered and spoke, and the women held drinks and babies and smiled. Let us define us by what we are not, the men cried out. We are not British. We are not the States. We are sort of not Quebec. We are definitely not Toronto. The artists in my mother and father's circle, lovely men, mainly white and middle class, but not all, sensed the confusion and turned to serious joking. Their leader, the late great Greg Curnow, believed deeply in a regionalism that celebrated the buildings on his street, the people in his neighborhood, the trees, the sidewalks. a double play on finding something concrete. He measured the exact distances of his daily commutes and kept all his bus passes. Defiantly, he sketched a map of North America where Canada and Mexico shared a border. He founded the Nihilist Spasm Band. It was a good joke and not to be taken lightly, and meaning came from the wild abandon into nothingness of the noise. It's not music, Greg would say. "No Canada!" chanted Bill Exley in the cloth booth structure made of rough-hewn wood, the wailings of the made-from-scratch instruments erupting around him. "Only in North America, Anne. You'll see. In Europe, they are so steeped in their traditions. Not as much newness can emerge." I had not yet understood the context of my full-on Canadianhood. Granted, my father tried his darndest to teach me ancient geographies. He studied the cultural migration of various First Nation on the continent by cognitive analysis of symmetry patterns in the pottery and the meanings of morphemes in these oral traditions that were the peoples of the land on which I now grew as well. Which lake is that, Anne? What does that inlet flow from or to? Which tribes lived on this land? At the back of the orange Volkswagen, I shrugged and put my headphones back in. At 15, mainstream culture is a strong stream. But later, rather than nothing, I experimented with being really into the places where my parents' parents were from. When I spent a year in France, a recurring theme today, I know, very Canadian, I'd been brought up in the first Trudeau's 2 languages, 1 country, and all my French immersion profs were imported from the old country. When I told the France French that I was Canadian, they said, "Oui, mais c'est quoi votre parenté?" As in, what is the vérité of your bloodline? Well, I was already quite steeped in British shows and music and movies, pictures of Diana over my toy chest, but my Icelandicness was relatively untouched. I dove in both feet, stayed in Reykjavik in my teens for half a year, answered, "Jeg at læra tala íslensku." Yeah, I'm learning to speak, when I was spoken to in my mother's tongue. Encountered communication complexities and learned that I wasn't actually Icelandic. There is such a thing as looking the part, but I was not where I had gone to high school. So I came back to, what is Canada? A place where we whisper and make safety policies and are more truly into our apologies, a place where the racism is quiet and a bit harder to point to, but no less difficult to completely eradicate. What I knew of Inuit, First Nation, Métis, and other indigenous peoples was through the lens of anthropology, and I studied the different configurations of humanity hard, throughout the ages, as a way to check what is true. It became more difficult to accept the holidays and customs of my Canadian upbringing at face value. I wanted to play Culture Jam with the new-to-me versions of how to be that I now knew or thought I knew. So how am I Canadian? By taking it really seriously. That question, for one thing, I knew that. I liked attending the annual Nihilist picnic, doing the no running jump or the tug of Nor. When childhood me demanded a slower pitch from Greg at the baseball diamond, "No," he replied with glee. But he and his wife Sheila cared deeply about me, the community, and the city I was in. These No Canada games from the creative men, it was their best guess at the time. Deep down we all knew we settlers would have to retrieve some pieces. Recently I discovered that just towards the time before Greg was killed in the bicycle accident in the early 90s, he had been researching and making paintings about who had lived for the last 10,000 years on the land of his now family home. Paleo-Indians, archaic culture, woodland culture, Attawandaron, abandoned, Ojibwe. For me, this attention to regional detail is a truth that endures, and the Nihilist jokes do not subsist well past the happiness and prosperity that my European settler parents and their friends enjoyed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in their Canada. In these now harsher economic times, it is more clear for all of us how often privilege rests on an over-concentration of unfair labor. In Canada, we were, for some, a place of harbor, but also know of the unspeakable, now more spoken atrocities that every Canadian and every artist and poet's reality to explore, in dignity and compassion with each other. Now I finish the phrase, "No Canada," with "No Canada without clean water for First Peoples," as a dear friend reminded me recently from a podium. "No Canada without honoring treaties and practicing reciprocity and giving oppressed peoples their rightful land deeds." And while in some ways we are more and more proud of our country these days, the shadow that the USA cast for years in their heyday now waning, Canada sits as a privileged holdout internationally for free speech and democracy and nature and, yes, safety. And aside, how can the great wild of here ever be all safe? No wonder we are so preoccupied. So there it is. In the nihilism, there isn't enough ease left to offset the nothing is foreverness. I'm still very happy to reminisce. I always will be, because I felt part of something, a real no thing. But now I see that part of something is part of a much bigger something. And just like how, little did I know, I was in the little London, now I want to be part of the much broader conversations, tough and fascinating. Maybe rather than trying to reify always flawed individual humans, we need abstract statues in our cities that stand for newness, and craft circles where we make birch bark canoes and ride together in the rivers that we reaffirm as the land's lifeblood. I am a visitor here to this life and to this land. Having come to the East Coast for more fierce and wild air by the ocean than the protected valley and grids my childhood could provide, I'm a very focused here in this city on my Canadianness, as much for the better as I can muster. Through Youth Art Connection, I produce projects and events that support youth voice, especially the ones that need a lot more platforms as we fumble our way towards better versions of all our institutions. Sometimes I do collabs with Inuit and First Nation friends, and it can be tough, because I put on those opposite of rose-colored glasses that I see they see this whole system in, and I sense how this is where very great guidance will continue to come from. I am grateful for George Eliot Clark's call for a verse version of our Constitution. What else can possibly build the new reality, but ways of expressing that can show things that are not yet in the ways that they may be? Here's my gratitude expressed in 4 languages. Tak firir, thank you, merci, Wellalin.
Thank you very much, Anne. Thank you for sharing that. We have now the second last of our speakers, Chike Jeffers, who is a very beloved teacher in this institution, an associate professor in philosophy at Dalhousie who specializes in Africana philosophy and the philosophy of race, and who has been a major voice for thinking about ethics and the ways that philosophy can intersect with social justice on this campus.
Well, thank you. Very happy to be here. It seems clear to me that every Canadian should be deeply invested in reimagining Canada, and that only a lack of historical consciousness and a corresponding lack of preparation to see present matters of concern as systematic problems could lead to the complacency of saying Canada is fine as it is. Indeed, one thought that ought to occur at some point to every Canadian when considering the country's origin and development as a set of settler colonies is that it isn't crazy to imagine that justice might require Canada to cease to exist. Now, upon reflection, I don't think it's true that that's what justice requires, and I would not encourage Canadians to envision the end of Canada as an actual goal. Still, if one recognizes that someone who sees that as a goal is not necessarily thereby thinking anything crazy or heinous, that is a good sign that one has begun to confront the legacy of colonialism in Canada with the requisite seriousness. How then do I suggest reimagining Canada? How do I suggest that we reimagine its constitution? What I have to say is, in a way, quite conservative, given the goal of reimagining Canada in a way that will help us overcome the system of white supremacy that structured its founding, that characterized its existence since its founding in often explicit and intentional ways, and that remains in operation to the detriment of non-white Canadians in a number of ways today. I think we ought to reimagine Canada's written constitution, not by trying to rewrite it or add to it or take away from it, but rather by better appreciating what it contains. I think doing this may lead to new strategies, movements, and efforts in the fight against white supremacy. And so one way to put my view is that by conserving and clinging in certain ways to the Constitution we have, we may progress further and faster and more radically toward the defeat of racism and the attainment of a just society in which we all flourish. I want to suggest more specifically that we commit ourselves to highlighting more often and more forcefully the anti-racist content and implications of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The sections of the Charter I have in mind are sections 1, 15, especially subsection 2, section 25, and section 27. When I say we should highlight them more, I'm not arguing they're underappreciated or underutilized in legal settings. It is possible that this may be the case, but I'm not well placed to judge that. Think rather about the way everyday Americans regularly invoke parts of the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution, like the protection of freedom of speech in the First Amendment, or the right to bear arms in the Second Amendment. And also there are sayings like, plead the Fifth. Laying claim to the anti-racist charter means striving for much wider acquaintance among Canadians with the aspects of the charter I will discuss, invoking them in contexts where legal decisions are not necessarily an issue, and appreciating them not merely for their legal force, but also for their broader capacity to provide action-guiding values relevant to social life. Section 1 of the Charter states, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. It can be mistaken for a simple introduction to what follows it. Its importance is the least obvious on its face of the 4 sections I'll discuss. Nevertheless, its importance is hard to overstate. It not only introduces a list of rights and freedoms, but also cautions that there may be instances where these rights and freedoms are subject to limitations. These have to be reasonable limitations, compatible with a free and democratic society, but if they can be justified as such, they are acceptable. The most important example of Section 1 in action when thinking about the Charter's anti-racism is R. versus Keegstra, the 1990 Supreme Court case about hate speech, or as our criminal code calls it, hate propaganda. Section 319, subsection 2 of the criminal code makes it a criminal offense to willfully promote hatred against identifiable groups, which at the time of the case was defined as groups distinguished by color, race, religion, or ethnic origin. Although it now also includes national origin, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, and mental or physical disability. The question before the court was whether this law against the promotion of hatred violates Section 2B of the Charter, which states that everyone has freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression. The court found that yes, that law does indeed violate the freedom of expression protected in that section of the Charter. And yet we still have the law against hate propaganda because the court deemed it constitutional in spite of violating Section 2B. How? Because the court found that the law constitutes a reasonable limitation, justifiable in a free and democratic society, a reasonable limitation on freedom of expression. Even among Canadians who recognize that we have laws against the promotion of hatred that makes us different from the United States, there are many who don't realize the way Section 1 makes that difference. It moves us away from fetishizing rights and freedoms in the ways that many Americans fetishize the First Amendment, or even more disastrously, the second one. We can recognize the right to free expression as hugely important. As an example of liberalism's triumph over models of society in which one must always be afraid to speak truth to power, while also recognizing that Section 1 empowers us to express, through the force of law, our dedication to the eradication of racism as a form of power. Racism, it allows us to say, cannot hide its entrenchment of power behind the protection of rights and freedoms. One reason it is plausible to see Section 1 as implicitly, but nevertheless unmistakably implying this radical anti-racism is because Section 15 makes the move I have just described in a completely explicit manner. Subsection 1 of Section 15 says every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination, and in particular without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. Then, subsection 2 says that subsection 1 does not preclude any law, program, or activity that has as its object the amelioration of conditions of disadvantaged individuals or groups, including those that are disadvantaged because of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. Canadians ought to cherish the radical anti-racism of Section 15. Subsection 1 is anti-racist in the most straightforward and liberal way possible, prohibiting laws or government policies that discriminate against individuals on the basis of race. Subsection 2, on the other hand, registers the insufficiency of strict adherence to liberal individualism and clarifies the distinctions in law and policy between racial groups that work toward the advantage of this or that racial group are just, if their purpose is to aid in overcoming racism. The idea of bringing a legal challenge to an employment equity program on grounds of reverse discrimination is ruled out as impossible from the start. As I've mentioned earlier, though, we need to cherish Section 15 and the others, not just because of their legal effects, but because of the way their values can inform public life and debate more generally. A recent example of this, with regard to Section 15, comes from none other than my colleague, Letitia Mennel, in the philosophy department, who invoked this part of the charter when commenting on the Masuma Khan affair that many of you would know about. So there's quoted the Coast. Philosophy professor Letitia Mennel points to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in defending Khan's free speech, specifically Section 15b, which protects activity that has as its object the amelioration of conditions, ... And then Letitia says, "This seems to me like a sensible norm for public institutions to follow," Mennel says. That's the quote from the Coast. So what Letitia does here in asking us to use Section 15 to understand what Masuma did in her Facebook post is ask us to live up to the spirit of Section 15, even in a case where there is no employment equity program at stake. Section 25 says, "The guarantee in this Charter of certain rights and freedoms shall not be construed so as to abrogate or derogate from any Aboriginal treaty or other rights or freedoms that pertain to the Aboriginal peoples of Canada, including A, any rights or freedoms that have been recognized by the Royal Proclamation of October 7, 1763, and B, any rights or freedoms that now exist by way of land claim agreements or may be so acquired." This is important because if we are to lay claim to the anti-racist charter, we must also avoid the insufficiency of the kind of liberal individualist anti-racism that would fail to distinguish between Indigenous peoples and any other non-white groups. There is a certain kind of priority that must be accorded to the concerns of Indigenous peoples, namely recognition of their relative autonomy. Section 25 tells us that our understandings of our rights and freedoms must be made consistent with acknowledging and respecting the special rights of Indigenous peoples. And finally, I deeply cherish Section 27, which says, "This charter shall be interpreted in a manner consistent with the preservation and enhancement of the multicultural heritage of Canadians." There are many who believe that a radical anti-racist perspective should lead us to reject and criticize multiculturalism. And there are indeed certain insights in that kind of position. It is clear that promoting the superficial equality of cultures can be a way of hiding from the facts of racial hierarchy and the hard work of rectifying socioeconomic inequality. But I think it would be equally lacking to have anti-discrimination efforts going on in the absence of attacking the problem of Eurocentrism, which is precisely what multiculturalism helps us do. Combined with the other sections, Section 27 plays a key role in making the Charter a radically anti-racist document, if we choose to see it that way, if we choose to promote it that way, if we choose to reimagine Canada after white supremacy with the help of re-highlighting it. Thank
you. There was a strong conversation going on with how Richard started us off and how Chike is taking us towards our close. And Michaela has very, very graciously waited to be the final speaker. We wanted one of our youth speakers to be our final speaker. And we have a remarkable speaker here, a wordsmith who has used her linguistic gifts to create comedy, to speak out against racism, to uplift her Mi'kmaq people, and very recently to speak to the United Nations on the topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. So we have a very, very remarkable speaker to close our event today. Thank you very much. Kali Julie.
Well, I have an essay I wrote at the beginning of this year to present to you. We did this project called This I Believe project that you do in grade 12. And I was kind of stumped at first, thinking about what I should write about. And when we first started the project, the teacher hands out these slips, and she's like, I want you to write what you guys believe in. It doesn't have to be too deep, and it's just a little slip, like an exit slip to leave the class. And me, being goofy, I go and quote the Peter Pan movie, and I write, I do believe in fairies. I do. And we hand these in the next day. She gives me back my slip, and she's like, I think you should give this a little more thought, is what she wrote on it. And I was like, all right. And then she's like, you guys don't have to write what's on your slip you gave me the other day, but you can write something else. And I'm sitting in class thinking, I have my friends. I'm the only Mi'kmaq student in my English class. And sitting there, and everyone's writing about if they believe in God, if they don't believe in God. Some of the boys are writing about how they believe in hockey and things like that. And I was sitting there, I was like, what do I believe in? And all I could think about was what I believe in about myself. And this is where the title of my essay is The Missing Part of Me. And this is where it all came from, was just kind of sitting in class. I believe that a part of me is missing. That part is sitting in a classroom afraid of what type of abuse today will bring. That part of me is a young girl taken from her home. A little girl lost and confused. A little girl stripped of her long hair and her language. A child stripped of their innocence. I believe that the residential school stole that missing part of me. They stole my culture, my way of life, and the part of me that makes me, me. The residential schools didn't only steal, but they gave us addictions to numb the pain they caused, gave us abusive behaviors that we can't get away from, and they gave us a new way of life that caused problems. Sir John A. Macdonald said, when the school is on reserve, the child lives with its parents, who are savages. Then he is simply a savage who can read and write. They put us in these schools to take the savage out of us, so it feels as if this savage part is the part that I'm missing. This is the part I miss the most. They refer to this part of me as savage, but I refer to it as Mi'kmaq, and I am proud to be Mi'kmaq. It's like a missing piece to a puzzle. Without that piece, it's not complete. A piece of my puzzle is missing, and I am not complete. I feel as though I'm empty without it. I still have parts of my Mi'kmaq culture that run deep, but a large part is gone. I believe that I will forever be looking for this missing part. I will never quit searching for it, not just for me, but for the generation after me. Even though I still encounter people trying to take me away from my culture and treating me differently because of my history, I will not stop being proud of who I am and where I come from. This is just the beginning of my mission to find that missing part of me. This is what I believe.
Thank you so much for sharing that with me.
I just kind of wanted to bring up the part I do talk a lot about being Mi'kmaq in class, and being the only Mi'kmaq student in class. There's a lot on me, and throughout the past couple weeks of me talking about my rights and talking about how non-Native people are privileged and they have a lot more things that we don't have, and but to have ignorant 17, 18-year-old boys make gross comments and be completely ignorant about it is really rough. And I'm trying to the reason why I continue to try to speak about this is to educate them, but not to be not to put them down in any way, even though they are white and privileged. And I don't think they really understand, and I don't want to be rude about it, so I just try to put my words into a way to make them understand that it is hard. And like, it's just like, I want to teach people. I don't want to humiliate them or make them feel bad or like have them feel bad because of what their ancestors did to me, but I don't want them also making rude comments about it. So I'm just trying my best to educate everybody.
If you want us to roll through every now and then.
To back you up. Yeah.
We have some folks who would like to be part of it. You have been a wonderful teacher to us, Michaela. Thank you so much.
I want to add something. If any of you guys want to know, but there's a lot of racist comments during, while I'm attending Hancy Sproul High, and that's in Milford, around Indian Brook. And if any of you want to come and try to help us out any way that you can, it'd be very grateful. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with us as well.
Complete race warrior change.
Please, I have a feeling that there's a lot of people in the room that would like to hear, especially from you, maybe when we're up at the reception, if you can say for a few minutes about how we can help and what we can do.
Okay. Like, I think I heard someone say earlier, oh yeah, it was you, Richard, said that, when I say, when I say something, it sounds like I'm hating you, but when other people who don't look like me say the same thing, and then it's great. And the same thing with women and feminism, right? A man says something in a feminist vein, everyone says, oh yeah, justice, right? A woman says, like, bitch. yeah. So,
I just
if
want
that's useful.
to add something in as well. For my Mi'kmaq class over in Citadel, for me and the other person that is strongly tied to our culture, we feel, if anything, a little more scared to, even though it's our class and it's like our culture that we're learning about, it's hard to come forward as people who actually know about it to the people that have no idea, what it is that they're actually learning about. And the way to come into a classroom like that to learn about a culture. And it's hard to come forward with it because we feel like since there's so few of us, that the hate will definitely come forward a lot much worse, which is obviously something that these guys have experienced as well. But we just haven't said anything yet over at our school.
I think that it's really going to be hard to say anything more important than these three young artists have said to us today, and then the things that have been said in the room that intersect with what you've been saying to us. And knowing that thanks to the passion of the speakers and the art in the room, we've gone a little bit longer than we meant to, and some people may have parking and all those things. I think what we might do now is, with these words in our hearts and in our ears, and thinking about how we can go from this conversation, and Tamar said this to me yesterday, is this just a one-off, or is this a beginning? Hopefully make it a beginning of working with some of those questions that you've raised for us and those requests that have been made around the room and suggestions, and take it and move forward. So perhaps on that note, I'm just going to invite everybody to continue the conversation in a more informal way over some food and drink right next door at the top of the stairs and to your left. And I'm going to echo what Anne said at the end of her talk. Thank you. Merci. Well, Alan, thank you.